Hi, this is Reverend Dr. Nadine Rosechild-Sullivan, and it is April 11th, Sunday, April 11th in the afternoon. And I want to welcome you just to a little discussion and a little bit of visualization, a little bit of prayer and meditation at the end of it. But I want to talk about where we're at today in the United States and where we're at in regard to the globe. I am totally thrilled to be able to have been vaccinated, and I was able to get to eat with my daughters unmasked, which was just delightful. All of us being vaccinated because of where we're at and the progress we've made in getting the vaccine out to people in the United States in this relatively short period of time since the inauguration in January. So I really rejoice in that moment and delight in the fact that I got to spend that time this weekend with my children and with my grandchildren, knowing, that I could be safe in this space. I also want to point out that we need to get children vaccinated as well. And we're really looking forward to that, moving forward to them they've moved it down now to 16 and older, but we're looking forward to it moving down to 12 and older in our case. And, just grateful for the progress that's being made and for the safety and efficacy that looks like it's there for younger people too, in regard at least to the Pfizer vaccine. There are Moderna tests being run nearby in Philadelphia, and so looking forward to that space and at the same time, we're aware that the virus is rising and the numbers are rising, specifically in a couple of places where that UK variant is spreading, and it includes where I'm at, where I'm sitting in Philadelphia. It includes, this region of Southeast Pennsylvania. It includes New Jersey. It includes New York. It includes Michigan. So, aware that there's a much more contagious variant out there. To the best of the scientists' knowledge, the vaccine I've received will be good, in protecting me from that one, but it cannot be foretold whether it will always protect us from all variants that are rising. And there are problems with variants rising. There are problems because in places like Brazil, where the leader is anti-mask and anti-social mitigation and anti-vaccination. There's been very few people vaccinated, and there's a variant right from there. There's a South African variant. There are just different variants springing up, and there are places where people are just being foolish and spreading the variant. And whatever that is, or whatever people's reasons. And I'm not talking about, if you have vaccine hesitancy, I'm not necessarily calling that foolish. I understand that it does look like this came about quickly. I also understand that the scientists are telling us that they actually were working on this vaccine technology for a good 10 years, knowing that pandemics are inevitable, have been repetitive in human history. And that with the ways we're messing with the natural environment, that this zoological or whatever it's called transfer from animal to human was, absolutely it was a guaranteed thing, that there was a pandemic that would happen, and that, it has now, so that they were prepared in advance, and hence the reason they were able to get out safe and effective vaccines in what looks like such a short window of time, because all they had to do was get the spike protein from this virus and plug it into the mRNA technology that does not put a chip in us and does not change our DNA, but put it into that medium and then get it out to us, get it manufactured and get it out to the population in large numbers. It needs to get out to other parts of the globe as well. It needs to get out to all nations and all people for us to get to a place where we stop making new variants and where we stop being at the threat of COVID coming back over and over and over again, and in new iterations that resist whatever we've done thus far. So there's some real concerns, but for this moment, I'm breathing a little bit easier, while all around me, I know that those who are younger and not yet vaccinated, or those who have not been able to access the vaccine, whether of their own choice or whether because of, problems getting access. I mean, it just was horrible trying to get access, especially early on in January, February, into March. It was horrible. But for those who have not been able to access it or who are not accessing it, This British variant is supposed to be twice as easily contagious, twice as transmissible, much more easily contagious, and potentially more deadly. So it is an area of real concern. And briefly, for just a moment, the globe has now reached, in the realm of diagnosed people who've been able to get a test and who then tested positive. And so these are not the real numbers. These are of those who could get a test, right? And so there's a certain level of privilege and to being able to access a test. If you're in certain categories of person, you're in, certain countries, certain socioeconomic class statuses, or whatever that situation is here or elsewhere. There have been problems getting tests. And of course, early in the pandemic here, the test didn't yet exist, or we weren't using the WHO test. And so therefore, a lot of people who have had COVID were not able to get a test to ascertain whether or not they were positive. And so, but of those around the globe who have been able to get a test and who did test positive, the globe, as of the last time I looked at ncov2019.live, which was this afternoon, it has reached 136 million plus cases, diagnosed cases, over 136 million positive test results. And in the United States, again, according to ncov2019.live, it has reached almost 32 million diagnosed cases. So just let that sit with you for a moment. 32 million of the 136 million around the globe have been in the United States. Of deaths around the globe is just shy at this moment of 3 million deaths, 2,941,863. So 3 million deaths. And the United States is approaching, again, according to ncov2019.live, approaching 600,000. We are at 575,610, so 575,610, almost 576,000 deaths in the US attributed to coronavirus by this afternoon. This, of course, does not include, there's a real argument to be made for excess deaths in the past year, and how many of those excess deaths were undiagnosed cases of COVID, or were deaths that were caused because of COVID in some other way, that it was, COVID was there and the person had heart disease, would have lived longer, got COVID, and then the COVID kicked them over the edge, and and they got written up as dying of heart disease, but actually COVID had they were either still COVID positive, or COVID had weakened them further and kicked it over. Or, people who weren't able to access a hospital in a timely manner and died because they were unable to or afraid to go to an ER, or what, just all of those excess deaths are a statistic of import if one is looking at actual statistics and trying to actually assess this from a scientific perspective. So just taking a moment today to recognize the loss to the globe of almost 3 million people, and to the United States of close to 600,000 people, all of them with lives, is equally valid as yours or mine. And, just cut short in this way, which means we're approaching the level of deaths that were there in the United States, at least in regard to the 1918, 1919, 1920 flu pandemic. So we're very close to that at this point in time. But I want to change topics. And well, before I do, for just a moment, it did, I might have mentioned before, but it did dawn on me as I got thinking back, it dawned on me that my grandmother, my father's mother, had been born in such a year that she would have been my grandson's age at the time of that flu pandemic, and was in Philadelphia, where there was a particularly bad outbreak, and where Philadelphia did not do right in regard to mitigation efforts, and went ahead with a large social gathering that just led to to a mass spreading event for the Liberty Bond Parade, and flooded the hospital system and overpowered it, such as it was. But 100,000 cases in like a week after that, in Philadelphia, in those, small space, directly after that event. And so, just looking at, as I think about the children of this generation, the children of grade school, middle school, high school age, who are coming up in this and experiencing the social isolation of this, it is, and it might even be, it might be hardest. Well, I know it's harder on the grandson who's more social than it is on the one who's less social, because sociality is what is most being affected in some ways for our children. But I also know that, I remember being certain ages, and I know that as we approach our teen years, we begin to care more about things other than our family of birth, and begin to care more about friendships, begin to care more what other kids think of us, or what, the people in school or friendships, begin to care about dating, begin to care about those other things. And so I think it might be even particularly hardest maybe on high schoolers. I know many of our college students are simply ignoring lockdown and not really, either not able to because they are working some of those essential worker jobs and need to be earning money and need to be, trying to stay out there and stay in school and do all of those things. So there's a lot of having to be out in the workplace. There's also a lot of a feeling of invulnerability that's part of the cognition of the time in one's life cycle. There's sort of there are psychological effects that are in place in those age brackets, 18 to 22, 23, 24. And in that space also just, the willingness to, the need to drive to be out there socializing. But some of our high schoolers don't have the same autonomy to make their own decision and to break out of lockdown when they shouldn't. And so end up sometimes, some do, some don't, but can end up just really, at a place being stuck home with your family all of the time and limited social reach, outreach at a time in life when you're really quite driven to be making this change. It's just really, really tough. And so just, if you've got some kids in your world, a moment of patience for them, a moment of understanding, a moment of trying to put on their shoes, remember as best you can being that age, and think, what would have been like for you, then judge your own level of, extroversion or introversion, of sociality or anti-socialist, and, think about like, who are they and what are they going through, and give them a hug. So moving forward, I want to talk about two other factors in the United States before we go into visualization. I want to just take a moment to focus on, we actually have two original sins here in the United States, and perhaps it's some, in some very real ways in Western culture, but certainly, we'll just stay with the United States for this moment. And both of them are playing out very, very publicly in the news cycle this week, right? So we're in this space where we are watching the trial of Derek Chauvin and watching him be tried for the murder of George Floyd. And so racism is one of those two original sins. And Chauvin's really in this archetypal role of, the white supremacist, allegedly, but we know what we saw with our eyes, right? And so, he has not been yet found guilty in court, but, this archetype of the white supremacist enforcing racial terror on a person of color. Our other archetype of terror is being played out by Matt Gaetz, right? And so we have this sin of racism, and we also have this sin of sexism that I often feel is kind of sort of invisible at some level too. I mean, there's ways in which both are ignored and wiped away with it, there's a lot of denial, there's a lot of claiming it's flipped and it's the other way around. There's a lot of stuff going on behind this. But, this really is this space, right, of racism and sexism as these archetypal sins within this culture, and being played out in a culture war aspect, because there are those who ascribe to those sins, who ascribe to the philosophy of white supremacy and to a philosophy of male supremacy. And with that, then then, they would see the people accused of these infractions, of these crimes, they would see these people as justified. There's a rhetoric, there's a narrative that goes with justifying white supremacy and one that goes with justifying male supremacy. And it's American history, it's historically rooted. It is also, as I said, at some level further back, at some level Western. But in some ways, the racism is as the way it's playing out is particularly American, North American, United States, colonial North America and Revolutionary War North America and the nation founded in that and Civil War the United States in its history is some of it is particularly qualitatively specific to us and to this time, this journey of the past 200 some years that is the US, or the past 400 some years since its colonial roots. But when we think about, the trial of Derek Chauvin, I know what I believe should happen. I do not know what will actually happen. I don't know how a jury will find. I do know that in other cases like this, justice has not been served. I do know that it is extremely rare for any level of justice to be administered in this regard. I know what I watched. I know what I believe should happen because I know what I saw with my own eyes. I know what I saw as an already handcuffed, already put in the back of a police car. George Floyd was dragged out of that police car and thrown down onto the pavement, face down, still cuffed and knelt on by 3 police officers, 2 on his back, 1 on his neck, the one on trial right now, on his neck, knee on his neck, foot lifted up off the ground, all of his body weight on George Floyd's neck for over 8 minutes. And I know what I saw watching the video in the eyes of the man doing the kneeling. I know what I heard in the voices of the crowd pleading with the police officer to remove himself from this man's neck. I know that if someone is cuffed, I know what I grew up thinking was the job of police, what I was, and we recognize I grew up on Andy Griffith, but, and Mayberry RFD, but the idea was that the police were there to arrest someone who was considered to have committed a crime, and that the job of the officer is to arrest and transport and charge and book and do all of that and then turn over to the court system. And I know that if police skip that part, if they skip the booking and the judge and the lawyers and the trial of someone accused of a crime then and instead kill them, that's lynching. Because lynching, by definition, is any extrajudicial killing. Whether it's a mob showing up at the jail demanding that the person be brought out, they can hang him from a tree, or whether it's, a mob in the middle of the night, whatever, whether it was the Klan coming through and lighting a cross on a lawn and firing bullets into a house. Lynching is not always hanging. Lynching is killing extrajudicially, claiming someone had committed an infraction and then executing sentence on them. It's a vigilante form of violence. And it is not one that police are actually tasked with doing in the United States. The already handcuffed and in the back of the police car, George Floyd, should have been driven to the station and booked and put, and all of that would have been, nobody said he had a printing press making counterfeit $20 bills. None of us knows when we're handed a bill, whether it's real or not. And if, someone holds it up to the light and does the pen thing on it in the checkout line, that just means there's okay, I'm sorry, my 20 didn't work. I guess I can't buy this thing. But it's not something there's actually no evidence he was committing a crime, right? You could pass a 20 that's counterfeit and not know it's counterfeit, and then you're not, it shouldn't be a crime to be fooled by the money that was given to you. But all of that aside, I know what I saw. I saw an extrajudicial killing. I saw a man whose eyes were unmoved as he was pleaded with, or as he was petitioned, as he was implored by various people to stop what he was doing. And whatever is behind it, no one has the right just because they have a badge and a gun. It's actually not okay morally, and I doubt that it's actually legal for a police officer simply because he has the weaponry to pull this off, to then go on and execute someone without a trial. It's not their job. There is absolutely no way that the handcuffed in the back of the police car, George Floyd, offered any sort of threat to Derek Chauvin. So I know what should happen, and I know what I saw. And I know that it's the same thing I saw. I know that we saw it with the murder of Mike Brown. I know that we saw it with the murder of Tamir Rice, who at 12 years old, the police car had not even come to a full stop before he was shot dead, laying on the ground. I know what I saw when I watched the murder of Eric Garner on the streets of New York, choked to death for selling loose cigarettes. I know what I saw when I witnessed via the cell phone footage the murder of Philando Castile. I know what I saw in case, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Around the time of the murder of Mike Brown, I began to make a PowerPoint. I began to collect the names and the photos and the videos and make a PowerPoint for my classes that had to do with unarmed people being shot by the police in situations that appear where there's no apparent threat to the police officer, but time after time after time, the officer simply says to the internal affairs board that is reviewing the case that he felt threatened, and end of story, and almost no one goes to prison. The murder of Oscar Grant in Fruitvale Station on his way back after celebrating New Year's with his girlfriend, his murder is not only enacted in the movie Fruitvale Station, but that enactment in that film, there are on YouTube, there are 15 different angles from which passengers on that subway train, standing on that subway platform, were filming on their phones as he was shot in the back while already handcuffed and face down on the pavement. And there's video of it from the right, from the left, from over here, from over here, from over here. But there's like you put them together, you'd have a panoramic view of what was done to him. And he was talking back. So that is going on this week. And news reports saying, basically setting us up for, if he's found not guilty, like don't react kinds of statements going out. Also playing out this invisibility of sexism, right? So there's this reframing that's going on. So the report is that Gaetz and his friend Goldberg, I believe, were paying for sex. Well, we've got a rhetoric in this country about, what is sex work versus prostitution and what should be legal, what is legal, what's not, whatever, but with adult women. But the reframing that happens is this calling of a 17-year-old underage child, calling her a woman over and over and over again when a girl child is perpetrated against, then she gets framed as a woman. And so this Stephen Collins, I believe, whoever the right name is for the actor who played the father on Seventh Heaven, the pastor, father on Seventh Heaven. As a pastor at the time myself, loved the show, right? Loved that framing of life, but in that moment in my life. But he later, after, I don't know if I don't realize whether or not it killed the show or the show was already over, but somewhere in there, he ended up getting divorced, and it's part of his divorce and part of counseling prior to his divorce. And he said something to the wife that he's divorcing, or who's divorcing him, says something about, how he would expose himself to 10-year-old girls, children. And he kept, when he's being interviewed about it later, the interview I watched, and he's being interviewed by, some famous reporter. But as he's being interviewed, he kept calling them women. He kept saying he was sorry for the women he hurt. And I'm screaming at my YouTube video going, no, not women, children. If someone is a child at the time the perpetration happens, then even if they become a woman, or they grow up and they become a man, they become adult in whatever way, the person didn't perpetrate against an adult, they perpetrated against a child. Not that it's okay to perpetrate against adults or against us as adults, but so there's this conversation, and right now it's kind of unclear whether he will be charged or not. It's unclear whether or not, it is pretty clear that his partner in these ventures is going to is taking some sort of a plea deal, and that partner's lawyer is saying that Gaetz might not be sleeping too well at night or whatever. But it's unclear whether or not the actual charges will be, or the actual whatever will play out about them perpetrating against an individual underage child, a 17-year-old girl, not a woman, or whether there will be some sort of charges about them selling underage girls, or having or purchasing multiple underage girls. It's like unclear how big this gets, how much it plays out, who was part of it. There's, some talk about the pictures he would show on the floor of the House of Representatives. Was he showing them just to go, hey, look what I did and look who I had? Or was he doing to go, oh, would you like to, all allegedly out there, whatever, playing out. But what is totally clear, whatever the truth ends up being or not being, whatever the courts do or don't find, whatever charges are or are not brought, whatever any of that looks like, I want to focus in for a minute on a different piece of this puzzle, because this reframing is what's actually very, very problematic. So perpetration against children is not about political party. I have written the book, or a book, on sexual assault, and domestic violence, but it has a good thick section on sexual assault and perpetration against children. It's called I Trusted You Fully and Honestly, Speaking of Gendered Assault. And in the research for that book, and studying and doing the work as an academic and writing that book, one of the things that becomes really clear is that almost all sexual violence, actually almost all violence, is in the 90th percentile of male perpetrators, men who identify as men perpetrators, or teenage, older teenage boys, whatever, but perpetrators are male. The time that changes a little is in perpetration against young children. There's a somewhat higher percent there. Instead of being in 90th percentile male, it's like in the 85th percentile male. And there are about 15% of perpetrators of sexual violence against children can be females. So we have the Ghislaine Maxwell, or the charges, allegedly, the charges against her. But so there's, so it's mostly male perpetrators, but it is huge economically, internationally and nationally, the money involved in, so there's the individual perpetrator who is, harming, using sex as harm. And there are my stories and other people's stories in this book. It is never okay to have sex with a child, because it always causes psychological harm, and it causes lifelong psychological harm. So there's that. But from a business perspective, it brings in more money than selling drugs or selling guns, right? Selling armaments. It's huge. It is done in all sorts of ways. There are people who are trafficked across borders. There is also trafficking, and as the largest percentage of people being trafficked for sex are teenage children, right? Underage girls, somewhere between the ages of 12 and 15. It is usually the introductory starting age. It is not adults choosing to engage in sex work. It is children who are being trafficked in one way or another. Sometimes they are convinced by someone that he's their boyfriend and caused to fall in love and then trafficked. Other times they are beaten, or they are drugged into it, or they are raped. I mean, there's all sorts of ways, right, that it happens here and anywhere around the globe. But it's really absolutely devastating. It is absolutely devastating to have an adult approach you as a child once. It is unbelievable. It's unimaginable for those of us who haven't lived it. It's unimaginable to imagine it happening 15 times a day with no escape, day after day, year after year, with no way out, right? Until you just are too old, nobody is buying, or no one can sell you anymore. So just absolutely awful. I want to say about age of consent laws. So they're saying this one accusation is about a 17-year-old, a girl who was 17 at the time, underage. Different states have different ages as the age of consent. There is good, solid reason for there to be an age of consent, for somebody under that age to be, air quotes, jailbait. The age of consent matters, and it matters because we know from the research in psychology and human biology, we know that the human brain is not fully developed as an adult brain until somewhere after the age of 18, somewhere in the early 20s. So the age of consent law, I believe, so in this nation, age of consent, in this nation, adulthood used to be deemed as 21, but we sent 18-year-olds to go fight and die in wars. But we wouldn't let them drink, right? So generally speaking, over the past 4 decades, we've moved our understanding, and our understanding as a culture right now is that an 18-year-old is an adult. Hence, I teach college, not high school, because I want to be able to freely teach my classes. And so my students are counted by the culture at large, by the universities and by their parents as being adult. So I teach adults, I teach college students. And there's a good reason for it not to be younger than 18, right? So at 18, I'm old enough, I can still have issues with choices 18-year-olds make, but overwhelmingly, you could do almost everything as an 18-year-old. You can leave home, your parents are no longer responsible for you. You can, you can get a driver's license before 18, but certainly by 18, even without your parents. You can do things. You can go to war, but you can join the military without anyone signing for you, right? So you're an adult at 18, legally in our culture. There should be no state with an age of consent law younger than 18. And it's not about the 17 and 18-year-old who are dating in high school, and then, or the 17 and 16-year-old who are dating, and then they reach their next birthdays, and this one becomes 18 and this one's still 17. It's not about statutory rape, like accusing, this is a basically same-aged couple, right? It's about age disparities. The age of consent law should be what I could consent to as a 15-year-old with another 15 or 16-year-old is one thing, right? That's over here. What I could not do as a 15 or 16-year-old was give consent to an adult, right? I couldn't give consent to someone 20, 25, 35, 45, 55 years old. It's about, or 85 years old. It's about age differential. It's about power differentials. The issue about sexual assault in the workplace, a large portion of it is tied up in the power that the boss has over an employee, or that someone has over someone else's reputation, or threats. You know, it's about power dynamics and power differences. And so in regard to a 17-year-old, whether or not the 17-year-old thought, and I have no idea what the 17-year-old thought, but whether or not a 17-year-old thinks they want to sleep with a person from a representative from the House of Representatives, right? Whether or not a 17-year-old thinks they want money, whether or think they're willing. I mean, we have no idea, right? We have no idea what this 17-year-old would say, but we also, that's not the point. The point is that a 17-year-old cannot give consent to someone with as much age differential as either of the men accused here, Goldberg or Gaetz, have from being 17. There's a reason, because the person underage does not have the cognitive development to be making this decision. There are 3 categories of people that we should never have sex with. If we have a, air quotes, normal IQ, we should not be sleeping or perpetrating sex against someone who is not there cognitively, right? And I'm, not like setting aside really high functioning people who are making sure, but there's no reason for someone to prey on those who can't say no, aren't really verbal, or aren't cognitively with it enough to be making a real decision about this thing, right? About whether or not to engage sexually. We cannot morally, ethically, and hopefully legally, we've been working on changing this, but having sex with someone who is intoxicated, inebriated, unable to say yes, right? We don't need they didn't say no. Yeah, no means no, but we didn't need they didn't say no. We need affirmative consent, right? The line of ethics should really, truly be around consent. And the person who is underage cannot consent, period. No matter what they think they want or don't want, no matter what the adult perpetrating thinks this child does or doesn't want, no matter, they are a child, and there's a reason for that consent statute, for that age of consent statute. We should standardize it across the United States. It should be 18 years old for everyone, and it should just be. So, in all of this, the greatest harm here is in this reframing, right? She'll be talked about as a woman. If it turns out there are others, they'll still be talked about as women. Routinely, people slip into calling teenage girls women. Teenage girls are not women. They are underage. They are minors, and their brain is not yet developed enough to be really able to give affirmative consent, informed consent, if you will, knowing what they're getting into. So, also the power differential. But so just taking a moment, where are you tonight? What is your life like? What have you been going through? What has your week been like? Where are you in regard to being able to get vaccinated, not able to get vaccinated? Where are you in regard to being able to stay home, having to go out and work, just tired of being locked down? Where are you in regard to this whole last over a year now of this pandemic? How is your intimate group, your family members, your loved ones, your friends, your coworkers? How are you all coming through this? Have you lost anyone? Have you lost part of your health? How are you in regard to, there's good news on that vaccine front. It seems like There's the positive effect of vaccination on long-term COVID sufferers, who some of their long-term symptoms are mending as they get vaccinated. So there's a lot, but where are you at? And then, in your life, in your vision of America, in your own experience, I don't know what you live or have lived or are living of racism or of white supremacy, or what you were taught or not taught, or, what you've experienced, what you get in a daily sense in regard to microaggressions or macroaggressions, or, whether you're encouraged to aggress. I know where you know, and where you're at and where you've been at and what you've been through in regard to people who use sex for harm. And there's all sorts of complexities to it. I address a lot of them in the book. There are people who begin to feel body betrayal because as they're perpetrated against, the body begins to respond, and then they feel like they were complicit and they wanted it when actually their mind was horrified, their emotions were horrified, but their body was betraying them. There are other people who end up feeling like their sexual orientation was caused by some perpetration, which, isn't true. There's a story I also read about Donnie McClurkin and saying he's going to be, I don't know if he said this a year ago or something, but it was, or thereabouts, but that he's going to probably be alone and living celibate the rest of his life because, he's had this sexual orientation issue and he was believing God to be ex-gay and delivered from it and, back and forth on that. And just, in his mind and in his belief system, he can't just be gay and he can't just be bisexual or whatever he actually is. But, he's got to, that's sin, right? So he's, depriving himself, denying himself. And in that, there are people, going, hey, you're not helping all the gay kids out here and all the bi kids out here and, all the kids with gender fluidity or nonconformity, non-binary status or trans, you're just carrying forward this narrative. But, sexism is the root of homophobia. The root of homophobia is the fear that a man is acting like a woman, is the fear that a man is giving up power and being dominated, being submissive like a woman, right? That's kind of problematic because, women don't have to be and shouldn't have to be submissive, and men shouldn't have to be and don't have to be dominant, and, whatever. But that whole something, there's sexism at the root of homophobia, and then all tangled into it at all its different levels and manifestations. And, in that space that we're in these culture wars, I don't know what you've lived and what you've experienced, but McClurkin, thought he has said or written, has put out there that he believed his problems. I don't know if he still does, but that he at least has believed that his issues with his sexual orientation, that he thought his attraction to men came from being perpetrated against as a child by a male perpetrator. But if that were the cause of homosexuality, then, then shouldn't gay women who have been perpetrated against by males in their childhood, shouldn't they be straight? It's illogical, right? We are who we are, and what's done to us doesn't make us who we are, but we are whomever we are already. And that, this perpetration is an act against us, but it doesn't make us gay or straight. And, so they'll tell gay women, you must be gay because a man perpetrated and so you don't want men. But they'll tell gay men, you must be gay because a man perpetrated against you and that made you want men. There's an illogic there. So whatever you've been through. Oh, and I was saying body betrayal, and also this, false self-shaming about one's sexual orientation based on one's experience. In all of this space, you have inside of you, if you can get past the noise of your mind, if you can get past all the negative self-talk, if you can get past the imprinted taste of our culture, because we are imprinted, we are socialized by our society, and things inside us are different than they would have been if we'd have been left to our own devices. If you can break free of enough of that, you can begin to hear that inside you, there is a voice that will steer you correctly each time. And it will never, ever lead you to cause harm to others. It will help you find the way to cause the least harm possible to others as you move forward. There is a sense of knowing that comes in what we call a gut feeling, an intuition somewhere in the relative region of your solar plexus. There's also times that knowing comes to your mind, dawns on your awareness like a light bulb being turned on, like a voice whispered in your ear. You have an intuitive guidance system. So for just a moment tonight, let us go into a space of creating a feeling of you moving forward and our nation growing up, moving forward, repenting of its original sins of racism and sexism with homophobia, and moving into a space of being the United States that actually allows liberty and justice for all and life. So just taking a moment, knowing where you're at today, envelop you and yours in a beam of light. Just see a circle of light that's generated out from your solar plexus. And that reaches out around you, and into that circle of light, you bring those you love and you need most. And see the light as protection, as the force that drives back darkness, that drives back lack of light, lack of knowledge, lack of illumination. See that light wrapped around you, protective, strong, keeping you and yours safe. Safe from COVID, while following the science, while doing all that you should, all that you can to help mitigate this, to help bring this under. Allowing yourself to consider if you've been resistant. Allow yourself internally to ask, is it time to move forward? People all around me getting vaccinated, they all seem okay. Some had a couple of symptoms for a day or so, most none. Is it time? They're saying the more of us get vaccinated, the better for helping to bring this thing under, for helping to reduce its ability to make new variants. Just feel that place in your solar plexus. If you've been able to be vaccinated, feel the gratitude, the hope that it brings of a future of life and future. If you haven't been and you want it, see yourself being able to get it. See it coming through now. Now that it's moving forward, now that there's more distribution, see being able to access yours. And if you've been hesitant, just be asking inside yourself, it wasn't unreasonable to wonder how this happened so fast, or wait and see what happened to some others, but feel that space in your midsection. Is it time? Does it help you move forward? Does it help you be safer and more free? Does it help those around you feel safer? Does it actually make us safer? Just open yourself to your own intuitive inner guidance about where you are in that space. And allow feeling and knowing to come to you. Whomever you consider the divine to be, however you construct the source of all or maybe those you've loved who have passed over to the other side. If you feel their presence, if you're aware in your thoughts, that the quiet ones, the ones that dawn on you, not the active, anxious, calculating thought life, but the quiet thoughts that turn on like a light bulb. Just let yourself listen and hear in your gut and in your mind, in the silence. What's your best path forward now, in the next few weeks? And then jobs, whatever you're going through, whatever you've been through, just let yourself hear what you need to know about employment or finances or housing or food. Just be aware that you know. Do you really let yourself, you know. There's things you know you haven't quite told yourself, but you can tell yourself in this space. And then see this nation living up to its best ideals. Just for a moment, imagine with me in America with a path to citizenship for immigrants, with a heart to have enough money for asylum courts to process those seeking asylum as refugees, to keep children and parents together, to find a path forward, to place those children with their families. Just feel that sense of, in America, honorable enough to cause its police force to protect and serve, and to punish those who execute extrajudicial lynchings. Not their role. Not their role to shoot people in the back or compress the arteries and the breath of those who are already cuffed and subdued. How would you not wiggle with someone kneeling on your spine and your neck? Allow yourself to see an America that finally comes to recognize that women are people, that women's rights are human rights, that allows us the freedom of choice to decide to take birth control if we want, or to decide what to do in the first few weeks of an unplanned conception. To see an America that allows real change, an equal rights amendment, and actual closing and end to the gendered pay gap. In America that has room and space for treating its children right and well. No space for perpetration against children. In America that values teachers. And just see the changes you want, whatever they may be. Judgment, justice, and righteousness. God said, this is the fast I've chosen. Not that you starve yourself or do penances, but that you do judgment, justice, and righteousness, that you feed the orphan and the widow, that you care for the stranger among you. Just allow you and yours to be safe. And visualize with me that there be justice for the unarmed victims of extrajudicial killings, specifically in this case, by those sworn to serve and protect, and that there be justice for all the children, mostly female, some male, who are held in the absolutely egregious violence of sex trafficking. Really, truly. No conspiracy theories, but a recognition that this happens at every tier of society, with and without the exchange of money, and that it's time we simply stop hurting kids and stop using sex for harm. Coming back today, rested and refreshed, see yourself moving forward peacefully, happily this week. May you have a wonderful, safe, and protected week. May our courts and our legal systems do the thing that moves us forward as a society into being a place of life, liberty, and justice for all. Be well.